U.S. Senator Ron Wyden joins me in studio now. We certainly appreciate you being here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
I want to go through some of the key points President Trump mentioned in his State of the Union address, starting with tariffs. The process of refunding tariffs could take years. Is there anything you're doing in the Senate to move that process along, especially with Oregon businesses feeling the pinch?
Yes, and I introduced legislation with 26 United States senators as co-sponsors to make sure that folks who've been hard hit would get refunds. And it looks just on the basis of the last couple of hours that FedEx, which of course is the big delivery giant, is saying that if they get help with tariffs, they're going to make some of it available to consumers. So some of the big businesses as well as the small businesses are paying attention to what our group of 26 senators is talking about.
The Supreme Court found the president had overstepped his authority by instituting these tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. He immediately responded by imposing a 10% global tariff. Does Congress plan on responding to that?
Yes, that's exactly what I've been doing. I've already had one vote on the floor of the United States Senate where I got some Republican support to get rid of the Trump approach altogether. So it wouldn't just be the Supreme Court that was hostile to the Trump approach, but it would also be a bipartisan coalition in the Senate. I mean, the fact is, Donald Trump, with his tariff approach, has created a big mess for Oregon's small businesses, and he refuses to clean it up. One of the areas that I mentioned, because I had a press conference today with small businesses, is in the trial, in the actual transcript, Trump's lawyers said that if we lose, we're going to support refunds, and he hasn't lifted a finger to do that.
Together, you and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer introduced legislation called the Stop Presidential Embezzlement Act to prevent President Trump from receiving any financial benefit from his lawsuit against the IRS and the Treasury Department. If the bill passes, where would the money from the settlement go?
Well, it would go into the general fund, but the reality is I've never seen a more blatant conflict of interest, and the president's been getting so much grief now. I noticed in the last day or so, is backtracking, and he's saying, well, maybe I'll give it to charity, but I've never seen a more blatant conflict of interest.
Something Oregonians are very familiar with is vote by mail.
I'm the first United States senator in America elected by mail.
So President Trump has targeted vote by mail, specifically with the Save America Act. Does Congress plan to weigh in on that, and what are you thinking in the Senate?
We're going to fight like hell to keep it, because the fact is, in our state, it's always been bipartisan. I mentioned that I was the first. The second was Gordon Smith, who was a Republican, and then, of course, Dennis Richardson, our Secretary of State, who is very conservative. He basically told Donald Trump during Trump 1, told him to go fly a kite and don't mess with the Oregon vote-by-mail system.
You feel confident that bill will be dead in the Senate?
We're going to pull out all the stops. I think particularly during COVID, people said that was the only way they could vote.
Switching over to Iran, President Trump has said he is not happy with negotiations and thus far and has not made a decision about striking Iran. Does Congress get to weigh in that decision? I'm
pulling out all the stops to make sure we do. I was one of 22 United States senators who opposed going to war with Iraq. And I would also note for Oregonians that George W. Bush actually came to Congress and said, I want to have a debate about going to Iraq. It'd be nice to have a president do that with Iran.
There's some discussion about whether the president is trying to exert leverage here and get Iran to come to the table, or if he really will attack. Do you get any sense of what the plan is here?
That's why you ought to have a debate on the floor of the United States Senate, the way George W. Bush did for Iraq. I mean, it's just, to me, what you do when there are big foreign policy questions, and Congress has a role.
Do you think Iraq plays a role? I mean, there was the debate, but it ended up being they didn't have the weapons of mass destruction, which was the reason we went to war there. So even if there is a debate, how can you really be sure that you're making the right decision?
You ought to get all the information you possibly can, and having an open discussion. I mean, I've had more than 1,100 open-to-all town hall meetings. It's there because I want people to have a chance to be heard. That was what George W. Bush did with Iraq, and we ought to do it again with Iran and make sure that there's a real discussion.
This is all, of course, about whether Iran should have a nuclear weapon or not, whether they're trying to do that. If people are concerned about Iran having a nuclear weapon and they say that should be prevented, what do you say to them?
Well, I'm concerned as well. I also sit on the Select Committee on Intelligence, so I can't get into specifics. I mean, that's why we ought to involve people with respect to the big policy issues on the floor of the Senate, and then make sure we protect what are called sources and methods so our people are safe when you're talking about additional conflict.
Let's turn to the Oregon coast. As of February 2026, where we sit today, Immigration and Customs Enforcement confirmed in court filings it will not build that ICE facility there before May 1st. Do you have any updates beyond that you're able to share?
No, but as Oregon's senior senator, I'm sure not going to support some sort of airport Alcatraz or something like that. I mean, the reality is that's a fishing town. It's a tourism town. I think it would be dealt a very serious blow to their economy if it was a detention facility, and I'm pulling out all the stops. And in fact, during the Thanksgiving holidays, I had a town hall meeting there in Newport. We had more than 500 people show up. They made it clear that they weren't for a detention facility.
Is there anything you can do, anything the state can do?
Well, what I did in the instance of the helicopter is we mobilized such tremendous grassroots support for keeping the helicopter there that 4 or 5 days later, Senator Merkley and I were on the phone with the commander, and he said, I'm letting you keep it there. Grassroots pressure really matters, particularly with this president. He follows public opinion.
Let's turn to Mexico. The Mexican government took out a powerful cartel leader. There's some reporting that the U.S. intelligence was helpful in that process. Is the U.S. and Mexican collaboration good or bad
well,
when it comes to cartels and drug
I
trafficking?
can't talk about intelligence gathering, but yes, the cooperation is very useful. We continue to still cooperate with respect to making sure that people there are safe and working with the State Department. That's something I've been very active in.
One of the criticisms of the cartel action we've seen is that it creates a vacuum where people will now fight over that position. Cartels might fight each other. Critics say we should focus on the demand for drugs in the U.S. What do you say to people who are concerned about taking out these leaders?
I feel very strongly that you have to focus on both, and I'm working with the district attorney here from Multnomah County, Mr. Vasquez, in order to do that.
Jeffrey Epstein and those files have been in the news a lot recently. Congress passed a bill mandating the release of the files. The DOJ missed that deadline. There's also heavily redacted documents. What was your response to how that?
Well, I've never had a lot of confidence in the Attorney General Pam Bondi, and that's why almost 4 years ago I was staking out a very different approach. We call it follow the money. And the reason why is that the history in this country of tracking down people who are corrupt is you follow the money. That's how you caught Al Capone. We had another big development 2 days ago in that some documents that indicate that Epstein was involved in drugs and he worked with about 14 or 15 others has been hidden. I'm going to get to the bottom of it on my website. I discussed the issue. We've got a lot more questions.
To the nonpartisan, it seems really political. President Trump ran on this, saying the Democrats were involved in this Epstein link. And now that the files have been released, you see a lot of Democrats saying that it's President Trump involved. When Democrats were in control of Congress...
That's not been my position at all.
And you've been consistent. Why do you think when Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted in 2022 and the case was effectively closed, why at that point did Democratic leadership not push to release these files?
I'm going to speak for myself.
Yeah.
You know, I've been at this investigation for almost 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
We went and put a lot of pressure on the Biden people to go see what are called the SARs, the Suspicious Activity reports. After we saw them, we asked the senior Republicans to join us in the subpoena. They were unwilling. I have been bipartisan on this investigation for almost 4 years now, and I will continue to be so that people know, number one, getting the information out is not a blue issue or a red issue. For me, it's going to be just getting the facts out. Then I'm going to propose a major reform effort. I believe that a big source of this problem is that the Wall Street banks looked the other way on the Epstein matter for years and years on end. I'm going to make sure that there are enough penalties so that never, happens in America again.
I don't want to relitigate the past. I'll give it to you. You have been consistent on this issue. What did you hear from the Biden administration at the time when you were pushing this early on?
In other words, the question is how far can you go? And they let us see the data. They wouldn't let us take the data with us, which was unfortunate. They were also prosecuting Maxwell at the time, so they were better than the Trump people. I wanted to go further.
You mentioned the drug connection there. The former labor secretary who was the prosecutor, Alex Acosta, he's been quoted as saying he was told Jeffrey Epstein was connected to intelligence. What do you make of these connections? First, let's talk about the drug connection. What did you hear there?
The new documents, and as I say, I put on my website all the information that we possibly can get, certainly suggest some new and important questions. The real issue is, did the Trump people know about this, know about Epstein's role, and decide not to bring it up? But I'll have more to say about this before too long.
Do you believe more people should be prosecuted?
There is no question that other countries, you look, for example, at what's gone on with the Brits, they made it clear that they weren't going to stop at the just citizen level. They were going to take it right to royalty. We need to do the same thing.
If there's any criticism that you're focused too much on President Trump as opposed to what's happening in Oregon, how do you respond to that?
Well, I've always said I'll work with anybody who wants to do the right thing that helps the state. For example, on health care, I've always been bipartisan. I worked, for example, with Mike Crapo, Republican of Idaho, on what are called the pharmacy benefit manager restrictions. We actually won a 26-0 vote when I was the chairman in the last Congress. We also got support in this one. I'll work with anybody who wants to do the right thing for Oregon.
You've certainly achieved a position of leadership in the Senate. Given that, is there anything you're working on that you feel like is important for people to know about?
Well, we've been talking about health care costs. We've been talking about Epstein. We've been talking about tariffs. Those are just a few of the things. And if you go to my website, wyden.senate.gov, you'll see a much lengthier list.
Awesome. Senator Ron Wyden, thank you so much for your time.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. Thank you so much.